All right, so what we're doing today is we're talking about list, and the idea is that a list is very, very similar in structure, at least, to all of the other variables that we use. We're going to have the name of the list, we're going to set it equal, and we're going to set it equal to some values. Now, there's a lot of ways to populate a list, and all that means is assign the values to it. And the first way is easy. You just put in a square bracket, and you write in all the numbers separated by a comma, and then you close the bracket. That's the easiest way if you know what all the numbers are. And I've given two examples here. So I'm writing a for loop just to print out all of the values in my list. So when I run it, this for loop is cycling through and is printing out all the values. Now I could change this to be values. So this is my second list, and if I run it, it's just printing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you see how the for loop travels through the list, but we want to figure out how that works, right? Like, what if I wanted to just print this first slot? Then I could print my list 0. And let's go ahead and comment out all of this other stuff. And we'll run it. So now it's printing out my list 0, and that's just 1. And it actually doesn't matter in this case if you're using my list or values, because both of their first indexed slot is 1. But then we could print my list 2, or my list 1 rather, and now we're getting 1 and 3. But if I were to print values 1, then I would get 1 and 2. So when we look at this, and this is not part of the code, we'll comment it out. So if we look at indexing, then the first slot is always 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, 9. However many values you have in your index, or in your list, your maximum index will be 1 less than the total number of values in your list. And that's because we start counting at 0. So this one has 10 elements, but the top index is only 9. So my list has 8 values. So my list 7 should give me a 23, which it does. Now, if I were to put a my list 8 in here, and I run it, it's going to give me an error. And it just says index is out of range. When it says out of range, what that means is you've asked for a value that doesn't exist. So you've asked for a value in your list that does not exist. So that's kind of the general idea of list. But let's look at some other ways to populate a list. So we're going to start off by creating a list variable. And I'm not going to give it, I'll give it a 0 to begin with. So now we can run a for loop. So we'll say for x in range. We think about how long I want this list to be. I want this list to be 100 units long. So, because we've made it 100 units long, and we start off with one unit, right? We start off with 0 in the first slot. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing, I want to change this 0 to some number. Right, so I'm going to start off with if x equals 0. Whoops, wrong language there. Apologies. If x equals 0, then I want my list x to be equal to, let's just say 1 for now. And then else, I want my list x to be equal to x squared. So what this is going to give me when I print it out, which I will print it out here, so print my list x after we do that, and we want to put it all on the same line, so we're just going to say end equals and separate it by a comma. So now when I run this, when the very first time x is equal to 0, right? So the very first time it's going to set it to 1, and then it's going to print 1. After that, x is no longer 0. So it's going to jump to the else, and then it's just going to make it square. So when x is 2, it's going to print 4. When x is 3, it's going to print 9, so forth and so on. I have an error here. List assignment index out of range. That should, oh, right. So I'm making a huge mistake here. I'm squaring my list, but I'm not actually giving it any values, right? So before I give it a value, I have to append. So my list dot append and then x. So what this does is it takes whatever value of x and it appends it into my list. And then I'm taking that value and squaring it. So it's giving me 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64. But you'll notice I have two 1s here. And that's because my list 1, right, the first index, the 1 index is also equal to 1. So what we want to do is append x plus 1. We can run it, and now my list x, we should 1, 1, 4, 9, 16, say x plus 7. It's like that's not working, and it's not working. So then we'll do my list x is equal to, instead, x plus 1 squared. So now we get 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. So again, we're using a for loop, working through the range. Our initial list has basically no values in it, but we can append all of those lists. So then the next thing we want to do is search for a number in the list. So we're fortunate because we've already printed it out so we can see what all the numbers are. But what I'm going to say is if x, let's see, is it x in list? Let's see, yeah. If x in my list, no, we don't want to use x. So let's say 5329. If 5329 in my list, then what I want to do is delete I would like to delete the value. So I like to delete my oh my goodness, my list, and then I need to figure out what slot the 5329 is in. But I can do that by 5329 in my list. I'm going to run it. 53.9 is still there, but that's because we haven't printed it out after this. So we're going to do another print, and we're just going to print my list and see what happens. 5329 is still in it. So we're going to do a print statement here. It says this is working. And it is working. So then we're going to print 5329 in my list to see what it does. And it does return true, so that's weird. So this returns true, and it's supposed to delete my list. So how do I find it in the list, right? Maybe that's the question. I need to index to find it. So I am going to, delete. All I'm doing here is trying to delete a true value, which isn't making any sense. So what I want to do is delete numbers, or my list dot index to find. So my list dot index 5329. There we go. So now when we print it the second time, the first time we print it, 5329 is there. and the second time we print it, 5329 is not there because we have deleted it. Now, these are already sorted naturally, so we don't need to run the sort function. We could copy it, but generally, this is kind of the idea, right? We can populate list by just appending values into the list. And I've done 100, which is probably way too many. If I do 10, and I've appended 10 values to the list, and then when I've printed out the list, it prints out the same thing. And in this case, 5329 does not exist. So we'll just put 9 and change this to 9 and run it again. And now I've taken the 9 out of the list. So those are all the primary elements of your listing. But I want to do one more thing. So in this example, I know I have all of the squares. Just to go through the process, because I have a couple of minutes left in this video, I want to swap my 16 and my 49. So I know that my 16 is my 0, 1, 2 slot. And I know that my 49 is 2, 3, 4, 5 slot. Right? So what I want to do is swap the mylist2 with the mylist5. And that shouldn't be too hard. All I need to do is create a temporary value, set it equal to mylist2. And then I can set mylist2 equal to mylist5. And then I set mylist5 equal to the temporary variable. And what this has done is it's basically pulled mylist2 out of the list, replaced it with mylist5, because remember the variable and assigning the value, and then took the mylist5 variable and assigned it to the temporary value. So I have 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49. Here I've deleted the 9, and I've also swapped the 16 and the 49. So you can access individual elements within the list. You can change them, you can update them. You can do whatever you can normally do with a normal variable as long as you're accessing the index. The one thing we didn't do was the splicing or slicing. So I guess I'll run through and try to do one of those real quick. I have a couple of minutes left. So we have my list. I am going to, let's see, do my list, and then let's just start at 3 and run through 7. So we're going to set my list equal to my list 3 through 7. And then when I print my list again, what should happen is it should print 0, 1, 2, 3. It should start at 25. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 go up to 81. 25 and it went to 64. It didn't make it to 81 because the last number never actually gets selected, right? So it's 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's slicing. That's working with indexes. That's using an if statement to find an index. That's using a for loop to populate. And we already looked at populating it just by adding in the numbers ourselves. And that's everything. And we will see you next week. I'll post an assignment tonight, and it will be for the whole weekend. So you'll turn the assignment in on Sunday night. If you have any questions, you can always email me, and we'll work it out. Thanks.